Yo guys, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our Bajheera official merchandise page on Designed by Humans. We've been adding a bunch of new stuff to it, and I think some of the new designs and some of the new styles are pretty awesome. Some funny ones too. Definitely encourage you guys to take a moment and check this out if you haven't already. Designed by Humans often runs lots of seasonal sales, and I know you can get 15% off right now on there, so if you're looking to pick up some games and gains or Bajheera's Army merch, definitely be sure to head over to our link in the description, check that out, and show it some love. Thanks, guys. Yo, what's up, guys? Bajheera here. This video is going to be our 9.0.5 Shadowlands Arms Warrior Guide. So, a lot of the things that we talked about in our 9.0 guide and videos that we've made still apply, but I'd like to put together a quick video that's a little bit more comprehensive that goes over some of the differences that I've highlighted between 9.0 and 9.0.5, because a few things have changed. First things first, we can start off with the talents, because I think talents are probably the thing that has changed the least. These are my world PvE talents if you want to check those out. But since we're primarily focused on PvP, we'll start there. So for me, this is pretty much the standard build still. Sudden Death, Stormbolt, Massacre, D-Stance, Warbreaker, Avatar, Dreadnought. That is still pretty much what you're going to play here. You can swap into Rend if you're playing like Necrolord, Night Fae, or Kyrian, and you want to have a little bit more consistent pressure, maybe in like a 2v2 scenario. But in general, I still love Massacre, especially if you're Venthyr. I think that's pretty much the way to go in terms of honor talents. A lot of these things have stayed the same as well. This setup right here is just like a fun offensive build for like BGs. You're going to play Disarm into things where Disarm has value, like Warriors, Rogues, DKs, MM Hunters, things like that. You can play things like Master and Commander, even though it got nerfed a little bit. It is now a 2-minute cooldown instead of a 1-minute cooldown, so it doesn't really have quite the effectiveness that it had before. Things like Overwatch are still fantastic against really anything that can have some casted CC. Just gives you another way to reflect for your teammates, other than having the spell Reflect Legendary, which I still highly recommend. But yeah, your honor talents are still pretty much the same. You're going to have the opportunity to use the defensive ones if you need them. You can use the offensive ones for fun. I think Death Sentence is a really fun one to lock in if you're Venthyr, just so that you can charge around with Execute constantly. That's going to help out a lot. Storm Resurrection is kind of a fun one, and Sharpened Blade is always pretty solid as well for the extra healing reduction that it gives. So, honor talent-wise, things are pretty much the same. Things that are a little bit different for me, though, is that since I maxed out Night Fae at rank 40, I went ahead and swapped over to Venthyr to start working on that one to bump its renown up. Plus, Venthyr is just very, very powerful. It's definitely an offensive powerhouse. And a few things that change with Venthyr, like I said, are you're going to probably want to lock in Death Sentence. Another thing that changes with Venthyr is your gear. So with Necrolord, with Kyrian, with Night Fae, basically non-Venthyr, a lot of times we were talking about going Haste Verse for smooth rotation, good rage generation, and Demuge, and you would go Unhinged or something like that for your legendary. Nowadays with Venthyr, and now keep in mind, my setup for Venthyr is not currently optimal, but I'll just let you know what you're pretty much going for. Venthyr actually would probably want to sacrifice a lot of this haste and move it into crit. So rather than having, you know, very low crit, higher haste, I'm actually in the process of moving a lot of my haste over to crit. So instead of buying a bunch of haste verse items like I currently have, what you're going to want to do is buy the crit verse items. So, and of course then you put crit verse on your legendary as well. So I have the crit verse gloves. Eventually, I'm going to want to get the Crit Verse belt. I have the Crit Verse ring that you can buy, and I have the Haste Verse ring, but I would want to buy the Crit Verse ring. And then I might even use that Crit Trinket, the on-use trinket that gives you strength on use, but gives you crit baseline. That could be pretty cool too. Probably get the Crit Verse shoulders. I have a Crit Verse cloak, so you can see what I'm talking about here. You're eventually going to move over into crit, just to make those condemns crit. And instead of playing something like Battlelord, which is a new, well, not a new legendary, but a legendary that has gotten buffed, you pretty much want to play Battlelord with Kyrian, Necrolord, Night Fae. But for Venthyr, you're probably going to want to play Exploiter. Put that on your shoulders with Crit Verse, you're good to go. But other ones I think would probably do well with Battlelord still. Battlelord feels okay as Venthyr, but stacking the crit and stacking, or not stacking, but using Executioner or Exploiter as the memory, Executioner as the item, you're going to end up doing some big damage, big condemn crits into big Mortal Strike crits is a lot of chunky damage, and it's a playstyle that I'm excited to try out as I continue to grind up, you know, more conquests for the items. Got to get the Stygia for the sockets, and then of course we got to get the Soul Ash for the legendaries. But by the end of the season, we're probably going to have access to just about all of those things as long as you continue to do your weekly and daily stuff. But that's the big change that I would want to mention, is because people are asking a lot about what legendaries. So I'm pretty sure Venthyr, for your offensive legendary, you're going to want to use Exploiter with a lot of crit. And for Necrolord, Kyrian, and Night Fae, I think Battlelord, Haste Verse is still a good option. You could even experiment with crit on those as well, and that would probably be fine. But that's one of the main differences. And you'll notice with my gems, got to give Magnus a shout out for this one for sure. He made me want to try out these movement speed enhancements, and you can see it adds quite a bit of movement speed, so that's pretty neat. I have a BFA movement speed gem in one of my gem slots, and then I have this really neat one from Shadowlands, this speed increased by 13 for each Shadowlands gem you have socketed. This one is called the Straddling Jewel Doublet, and then this one is called the Straddling Sage Agate, however you pronounce that. But regardless, you have the extra movement speed, which is always nice for chasing people down as a warrior. And then you have Venthyr with Death Sentence to chase people down as well, so it adds up to quite a bit of uptime, which is pretty fun. But that's one of the big changes that I've seen with what I'm doing with my build, and just a few little things to mention. In terms of your second legendary, if you want to play an offensive legendary and then having one more, you're going to want to have Mirror pretty much always, right? You got to have the Reflect legendary, lock that one in. And Haste Verse for that one is probably fine, but if you're playing Venthyr, you might also want to go Crit Verse on it. The stat combinations, I'm pretty sure are going to be fine whether you're playing Haste Verse or Crit Verse, but Crit is something that you want to consider as Venthyr for sure, and it could even be good for other Covenants as well, because you don't get quite as much haste, you don't get quite as much reduction on the global cooldown from haste as you used to, so crit becomes more valuable, and crit also got buffed this expansion in doing more % damage than it used to. It used to be like, crits were like half as effective in PvP before. I think now they're like 3/4 as effective as they used to be. So that's pretty sweet, or as they normally are in PvE. So that's pretty cool. You can do big damage that way. In terms of other things that have changed for warriors, like I said, I think the legendaries were the big thing. The stats were a big thing. I think your honor talents, your talents are the same. Your gems could be a little bit different. Another important warrior change with 9.0.5 that I'd like to highlight is the fact that Necrolord went from being probably the worst warrior covenant to arguably one of the better ones, especially for certain 3v3 arena comps, due to the fact that the main ability, the War Banner, the Conqueror's Banner, got changed. So it used to be some sort of like ability that you had to stack up and then drop on the ground on a really long cooldown that would grant your party like extra crit damage and like health and something like that. It was not very appealing for a variety of reasons, but now it's been changed to do something a lot better. So now the banner grants 400 mastery and 30% increased movement speed to you and your 2 nearest allies. And it also prevents your movement speed from being reduced below 100% in this last 15 seconds, and generates 4 rage per second on a 2-minute cooldown. So that's pretty huge. And this becomes especially powerful, I would say, in certain melee cleaves where your partner can benefit from mastery, like Warrior Ret would be awesome. I think that, like, I mean, there's a ton of classes that benefit from mastery in a huge way. So do you as a warrior. So basically, I think that Necrolord is a very, very powerful pick for certain 3v3 arena comps. I feel like it's not quite as powerful in 2s. The banner is still nice, but you're definitely going to get the most out of this by buffing both of your teammates. That's going to be huge. They also, just for everybody, reworked Fleshcraft a little bit. They basically made Fleshcraft a bit stronger. I think it makes a bigger shield, and it takes less time to make that shield. I don't know if your damage is always reduced by 20% when you're channeling it, but they also made that the passive aspect of. I think that there was like a conduit path that you could take to make you absorb enemies' corpses and make the cooldown of Fleshcraft be reduced a little bit, but now it's just passive. But Fleshcraft is pretty cool, and the Soulbind paths for Necrolord aren't bad, but I don't want to dig into that too deeply, but I do just want to mention that Conqueror's Banner is much better than it was before, which I think puts Necrolord, like, arguably on par with those sort of this could be good situationally. Maybe even makes it, you know, I think it just, whether it makes it better than Kyrian or Venthyr, hard to tell. But Venthyr, Kyrian, and Necrolord are now like all big three really good choices for Warrior for Covenant. Just depends on what situation you're interested in. I would say Necrolord is probably the best for certain types of melee cleaves and threes. And then good old Night Fae. Like, I still love Night Fae. I still think it's awesome. I hope it gets buffed at some point to make that shockwave a little bit longer duration and a little bit shorter cooldown. That would be really, really helpful for bringing it up to speed. But right now, Night Fae is probably still the worst, but I still like it. But yeah, Venthyr, Necrolord, Kyrian, really, or Night Fae, you know, whichever one you like. Warriors are kind of unique in the fact that you can really pick whichever Covenant you like, and it's probably going to be fine. In terms of your conduits and stuff, everything's pretty much the same with conduits as well. Even if my Soulbind tree changes from playing a different Covenant, you're pretty much still going to play Crash the Ramparts and Mortal Combo as your main offensive conduits. Your defensive conduit, you definitely want to lock in Stalwart Guardian. If you can have two defensive ones, maybe a Brutal Vitality is good. Finesse conduits, I've been experimenting a little bit with finesse conduits because Inspiring Presence is still good, but it loses a little bit of effectiveness because you're not going to be playing Master and Commander as often. So you don't have big value off of huge rallying cries every minute, but it's still good. Safeguard is really, really good as well. Reducing the damage that your Intervene target takes is really, really nice. Intervene is a very powerful ability in it, like on its own, and adding Safeguard to that, adding a damage reduction element to that is really cool too. Because you can intervene melee attacks, right, and that just transfers it all to you. This makes them take less damage, which means that you take less damage when you intervene somebody. It also is helpful against magical stuff, right? So usually when you intervene somebody, if you're not playing Overwatch, doesn't really do much for them in terms of taking magical damage, but if you intervene them with Safeguard, they take 13% less magical damage, which is cool. So that's a solid one. But I've been experimenting with this sort of piece. I think that's really fun. Having Piercing Howl cooldown be reduced by 8 seconds makes it a powerful tool defensively and offensively, right? You have your peel, your strong 70% slow peel on a much shorter cooldown, which makes it that, you know, so that you can kite better or you can keep people off of your teammates better, but at the same time it also massively slows them for you to keep up with them better, right? So I feel like that has some pretty cool offensive and defensive utility. So I've been using this one a little bit, which is fun. But your finesse conduits, I really haven't used the Cacophonous Roar one very much. I still haven't really had the desire to put that one to use quite yet, but all three of these are still good, just depending on what situation you find yourself in. And in terms of like your burst rotation, in terms of what matters for a warrior, hopefully you guys have been watching some of those arena videos and BG videos and see how that works, right? So for a warrior, your heavy hitters are basically the rotation. It comes down to like a priority system, right? Your heavy hitter Mortal Strike is an ability that you want to press on cooldown. When you can't press Mortal Strike, you want to be pressing your overpowers. You do not need to stack your overpower to 2 before you press Mortal Strike. That's just kind of like a nice perk of overpower. You pretty much never use Slam. You pretty much always want to execute when you have the opportunity to do so. And now as Venthyr, it's a little bit different, right? Because you're probably going to be condemning more often than Mortal Strike in anyway. So Condemn is going to be your priority over Mortal Strike. But in general, Execute is your hardest hitting ability. Press that when you can. When people are low health, make sure you're cranking them with the Executes. I think having a Deep Wounds and having a Mortal Wound is important. So if that falls off, you probably want to go ahead and reapply your Mortal Strike. Even if you're having people, you know, able to be executed to an extent, you gotta decide whether the Execute's gonna kill them or whether you're just gonna keep your Mortal Wounds and Deep Wounds pressure up. It's probably a good idea to keep that up for sure. You want to keep Hamstring up if you're using Rend. You want to keep a Rend up, but Warrior's pretty simple priority system, right? Mortal Strike, Overpower, Execute when you can, pretty much never Slam. And instead of slamming and you have extra rage, you want to keep Ignore Pain up as well. So you have your buff to keep up, Ignore Pain, you have debuffs to keep up, your bleeds, your slow, your mortal wounds effects, those are important to keep up as well. when you have the opportunity, make sure you're pressing sweeping strikes. It's only a half global, so it doesn't. But it still is still on global, so you can't like macro it in with other things on global. But making good use of sweeping strikes is huge for doing damage as a warrior. And your burst tools are Avatar, has a damage increase effect, but it's also nice that it gets you out of roots. So you can use this as a burst tool. Sometimes you want to save this to get out of roots, and then burst with that, which is pretty cool. You know, an opportunity where an opponent would think that they could kite you actually becomes an opportunity for you to remove that kiting tool from them and apply more pressure with Avatar, which is great. But then Avatar Colossus Smash into big damage is always fun too, right? Warbreaker or Colossus Smash is your big damage that you have access to every 45 seconds unless you're using Anger Management, which you don't usually use, but it could be something to experiment with. Anger Management being this talent right here that makes your Warbreaker have a shorter cooldown by 1 second every time you spend 20 rage. It also works with Blade Storm, so Anger Management could be something fun to check out later on when you have more haste, but right now Dreadnought is just so good. So much damage, especially with Crash the Ramparts. It makes your rotation pretty smooth too. Keeps you having plenty of rage for Ignore Pain. That's a good one to go with. But yeah, things like Avatar, Warbreaker, into Mortal Strikes, or even Blade Storms. If you're still playing Unhinged, you can Sweeping Strikes, Blade Storm, but right now, for me, as Venthyr, it's pretty much just like Avatar, Warbreaker, Condemn, and just crank them with damage. As Night Fae, it was Avatar, Warbreaker, Night Fae, Shockwave, that was pretty fun too. But the good thing about Warrior is the basics of your damage rotation are pretty straightforward, which allows you to constantly be thinking about how you can use all your utility to maximum effect, right? You know, some of those small questions that I get about Warrior are, you know, you want to be in D stance when you're taking damage. You really want to be in battle stance as much as you can to do the most damage as possible. So that's a situation where you got to be aware of the situation. You got to be looking at whether your healer's got cooldowns to help you out, whether the enemy team has cooldowns to nuke you down. You don't want to be sitting around in battle stance getting stunned and killed. That's important. But all in all, Warrior is in a really, really strong place right now. And practicing Warrior, getting comfortable with what you're capable of doing and putting that to use is going to be something that you're going to be able to improve on every single game, like pretty much without exception. You know, whenever I lose as a Warrior, it's like, yep, that's on me. And whenever you win, it's usually like, yeah, I could have won this game earlier if I played a little sharper. That's the nature of WoW in general, but Warrior especially right now is a class that hasn't been good for a while, but is very, very good right now and is definitely worth playing, worth learning, and worth, you know, you improving and making some rating gains with it too. I wanted to make this a quick video. I just wanted to go over some of the new things that I think were important to talk about with 9.0.5. Feel free to refer to some older guides if you need a more comprehensive look at Warrior and what each ability does and what each ability, you know, is appropriate for each different situation. But of course, be sure to check out the regular old gameplay videos. Tons of Arena, tons of BGs that I've posted, and tons more on the way. But I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for tuning in. Hope the video helps. We'll see you guys next time. Peace!